So I created this from a blank sheet of paper, what you might think of as a liminal space, a threshold, where before was blank, afterwards you have what's basically a map of inner life and outer life, moving back and forth across this liminal threshold, writing, thinking, writing, thinking. The original purpose behind this was just to follow a YouTube video by Jason Fox. And in order to save time, I had ChatGPT create a summary of the transcript of the podcast that he created. And he pointed me to Carol Cadwalader, who is an investigative journalist and specializing in what happened with Facebook, now Meta, and a surveillance corporation called Palantir. And in her talk, she talks about the digital coup. Interesting. Cadwalader called all these skedaddle the broligarchy, which I think is apt. And there was also a couple of quotes in there. One, that politics flows downstream, from culture, and AI is massively shaping culture. Politics flows downstream from culture, and AI is massively shaping culture. In other words, what's happening now in our world has already been massively shaped by AI. Leading to what? Well, she calls it total information collapse, where nothing ends up being real anymore. Deep fakes, propaganda, misinformation, disinformation, it's all part of the same ugly cloth. There's a lot happening here. One of the things they pointed to me, and I haven't looked into enough, is Timothy Snyder's book on tyranny. And right now, we all have to be asking ourselves, where are we on the continuum of fascism? And I'm always interested in big and small signals. Right about it here. I see this kind of work as virtual signaling. And Notebook LM and annotation tools like Hypothesis, for example, are both virtue signaling platforms. I mean, what's the purpose of this stuff? Other than to show that you know how to use the tool, that you are part of the elite managerial class who knows how to handle information. So, but you still have to ask, what do you do with this heap of words? And if it's more than conspicuous consumption and virtue signaling, what is it? How can you justify spending all this money on server energy? Then one of the things I started to realize that perhaps these tools allow us to filter the existing world we live in. We need help with this first level analysis, and perhaps AI can be a thinking partner towards that. and creating a series of record and a series of research breadcrumbs. In other words, the filter helps us decide what to slow read and write about, which is a real tough decision right now, because our tools shape us to be what Fox called rogues online. And the suggestion that he makes is that you build your own just map, space, place to where you can retreat to, be safe in, be protected from the oligarchy. And so, I thought about this, and I'm always thinking, because I write poetry, I'm always thinking in terms of figurative language, and it made me think, I could write something about this experience, but maybe it's more like a pond, a ripple in a pond. I just finished writing a poem about this recently, and I also saw a really amazing, beautiful, and surprising video about what's known as the Euler ring. Basically is I hate to call it a toy, but it is a toy that you spin a coin. Reminds me of science fiction, and it keeps going round and round and round, and faster and faster and faster until it gets to a point where it stops. And I'm thinking, the metaphor of this page as a liminal space, all blank sheet space, whether they're digital or analog, and that and de-amplifying the world. We create the ripples, this expanding ripples crossing each other, reinforcing each other, and likewise de-enforcing each other. So I think this makes me want to write a blog post about this. And I know this is just kind of brain noodling here, but I think it's important to share how we approach the work and the practice of thinking, researching, writing. That's all I ever did when I was a full-time teacher, was encourage people to ask important questions, get them to explore and research the answers to those questions, and then to share them with others, share their answers with others. And that's the real power of academia, is that sharing is so important. So, just to sum up a little bit, I started with a blank sheet of paper, a liminal space. I watched some videos. I used ChatGPT to summarize them so I could reinforce what is in those videos, because I didn't have time to view everything. And then to continue to think out loud on paper, to create a map of what's going on in my brain, so that I can decide which pieces of information are most important. And then to show the breadcrumbs here. Now, I'm under no illusion how many people are going to actually be watching this, but if any. But even all the pauses and thinking pauses here. YouTube, ScreenPal, which I'm using as a tool here, this paper, and all of my experience are part of it. And this is how I do. This is my research protocol for answering my research questions.